Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. When do you suppose the most important years of a person's life begin? Most people would probably answer, in youth. After all, that is when we receive our education, begin our careers, raise our families, and lay the foundation for the future. There is certainly some truth in that. But over the years, I have noticed something rather interesting. Many people spend the first half of life learning how to make a living. Only in the second half do they begin learning how to live. The early years are often filled with ambition, responsibility, and the desire to prove ourselves. We chase promotions, build businesses, pay mortgages, and meet expectations. We are busy accomplishing one milestone after another. But there comes a time when a person begins asking different questions. Is this the life I truly wanted? What should I do with the years I have left? What really matters now? These are not signs of decline. They are signs of maturity. The second half of life is not merely a continuation of the first. In many ways, it is an entirely different season. A season in which experience begins to replace uncertainty. Judgment becomes more valuable than speed. Purpose becomes more satisfying than recognition. And the work that matters most is no longer proving yourself to the world. It is becoming the person you were always capable of being. History gives us countless examples of men and women whose greatest contributions came long after most people would have expected them to slow down. Not because they suddenly became more talented, but because they finally understood what was truly worth giving their lives to. What the first half actually teaches. Most of us live it under considerable pressure, the pressure of expectation, of comparison, of the need to establish ourselves in the eyes of the world. We are building credentials, building a reputation, building the visible evidence that we have amounted to something. And this pressure, uncomfortable as it sometimes is, produces results. It drives effort. It creates the discipline that later becomes useful for different purposes, but it also produces a particular kind of distortion. When a man is spending his 30s and early 40s trying to prove himself, his attention is organized around the verdict of others. He is, in some part of himself, always asking, how am I doing by the standard that the world around me is using? Am I ahead or behind? Am I succeeding or failing by the measure that seems to count? This is not vanity. It is simply what the first half of life asks of most people. The social and professional world runs on comparison, on ranking, on the visible markers of progress. And a young man who ignores all of that is not necessarily wiser. He may simply be unprepared for what adulthood requires, but the measure was always imperfect. The comparison was always with the wrong things. I think of a businessman I knew some years ago, a capable, serious fellow who had spent 25 years building a company with real success. By the time he was in his mid-50s, the company was sound, his family was provided for, and the professional goals he had set for himself in his 30s had been largely achieved. He was not unhappy, but he was restless in a way he could not quite name. The work that had absorbed him completely for 2 decades had begun, gradually, to feel insufficient. Not the work itself. The company still interested him. But the question of whether the work was all there was had begun to press. He came to me one afternoon and said something I have thought about many times since. He said, I spent 25 years becoming good at something. Now I want to spend the next 25 becoming someone. That distinction between becoming good at something and becoming someone is, I think, exactly what the shift from the first half to the second half of life is about. The first half teaches us competence. It teaches us how to function in the world, how to earn, how to build, how to persist through difficulty. These are real and necessary things, and we should not be dismissive of them. But competence in the world is not the same as depth of character. Achievement in the visible sense is not the same as genuine wisdom. And the man who arrives at 50, having accumulated a great deal of the first but very little of the second, has, in some important sense, been working on the wrong account. The second half is the opportunity, if it is recognized as such, to begin making deposits into the account that matters most. The peculiar advantages of experience. There is something I want to say plainly about the years between 40 and 60 that does not get said plainly enough. These years carry advantages that youth does not have, not consolations, genuine advantages, not things that compensate for what has been lost, but things that youth is actually incapable of producing. The first advantage is the one I would call calibrated judgment. A young man of 25 can be brilliant. He can be energetic, creative, intellectually formidable. What he cannot be, not because of any deficiency, but simply because of the arithmetic of experience, is a man who has seen how things actually turn out. Who has watched his confident predictions fail, his certainties dissolve, his carefully laid plans encounter the real world and require revision. That experience, accumulated over decades, honestly examined, produces a quality of judgment that has no shortcut. The man of 50 who has been paying attention knows things about people, about organizations, about the relationship between effort and result, that his younger self could not have known regardless of his intelligence. Colonel Harlan Sanders provides one of the more striking examples of this principle. Sanders was 65 years old when he began what became the Kentucky Fried Chicken enterprise. He had spent decades running a service station, a motel, a restaurant, learning through each venture, often the hard way, what worked and what didn't. When his restaurant was forced to close following the construction of a new highway, he was left with very little in the way of material resources. What he was not left without was the accumulated judgment of 65 years of running enterprises, understanding customers, knowing what quality looked like in practice, and being willing to work. He took his recipe, drove from restaurant to restaurant across the country, and sold franchise rights for a modest fee per chicken sold. He was turned down over 1,000 times before the first agreement was signed. The enterprise he built from that beginning is a matter of public record. The point is not the scale of what he built. The point is what made it possible, not youth, not energy of the kind a 25-year-old commands. Something more durable, the judgment of a man who had been paying attention for 6.5 decades and who understood, with a clarity he could not have had at 30, exactly what he was doing and why. That understanding is the second half's great advantage. The second advantage is what I would call freedom from the need to be impressive. This is harder to describe but equally real. In the first half of life, a considerable portion of a person's energy goes toward the management of how they appear. Not necessarily dishonestly. Most people genuinely try to do good work, to be fair, to contribute something real. But the audience for that work is always, at least in part, other people. The younger man or woman is building a reputation, and building a reputation means caring about how the building looks to those watching. In the second half, for the person who has done the work of the first half reasonably well, that pressure eases. Not entirely. We remain social creatures throughout our lives, and the opinions of people we respect always matter to some degree. But the intensity of the dependence on external approval tends to diminish. And in that diminishment, in the quiet that opens up when proving yourself to the world is no longer the primary agenda, something becomes possible that wasn't quite available before. The person begins to do things because they matter, not because they are noticed. They take positions they believe in without first checking whether the room agrees. They give their time to the causes and people they genuinely care about, rather than the ones that produce the most visible recognition. This is not heroism. It is simply what happens when a person reaches the stage where the internal standard can finally outweigh the external one, and the work produced from that internal standard tends to be the best work a person ever does. The questions only the second half can answer. In the first half, the questions tend to be practical and external. How do I build a career? How do I provide for my family? How do I establish myself in the world? These are real questions, and they deserve serious attention. A man who doesn't engage with them is not wiser for his avoidance. He is simply less prepared for adult life. But somewhere, for most people, somewhere between 40 and 55, a different set of questions begins to surface. The first question is, what do I actually believe? Not what have I been told to believe, not what the people around me seem to believe, but what do I, after all these years of living and observing and experiencing the full range of what life produces, what do I actually think is true? This question rarely surfaces with real urgency in the early years, because in the early years, there is always something more immediately pressing. And because in the early years, most people are still largely operating on the beliefs they inherited, from their families, their education, the culture they grew up inside. They haven't yet had the experience to question most of those beliefs seriously. By 50, a person has had the experience. They have seen which beliefs held up under pressure and which dissolved when tested. They have watched people they admired fail and people they dismissed succeed, and they have had to revise their theories accordingly. They have experienced loss, disappointment, unexpected happiness, and the general unpredictability of a life actually lived. That experience, if the person is willing to examine it honestly, produces genuine conviction. Not the borrowed certainty of youth, but the earned conviction of someone who has thought seriously and tested their thinking against reality. The second question is, what am I actually for? Not what am I good at, though that matters. Not what pays well, though that matters too. But what is the specific contribution that my particular combination of experience, judgment, and care is most capable of making to the world around me? This is the question that the second half of life is uniquely positioned to answer, because answering it requires knowing oneself well enough to be honest about both capacities and limitations. And knowing oneself that well takes time. It takes the accumulated experience of having tried things, succeeded at some, failed at others, and gradually developed a realistic picture of what one is actually made of. The man of 30 typically overestimates himself in some areas and underestimates himself in others. His picture of his own capacities is optimistic in ways that experience hasn't yet corrected, and modest in ways that experience hasn't yet expanded. He doesn't yet know himself well enough to answer the question of what he is most truly for. By 50, if he has been paying attention, the picture is considerably more accurate, and a man with an accurate picture of his own capacities, combined with 50 years of accumulated knowledge and judgment, is a more powerful instrument for genuine contribution than he was at 30. The question is whether he recognizes it as such, or whether he has accepted the cultural story that the best is already behind him. The third question is, how do I want to be remembered? Not in the sense of legacy as reputation, the kind that is managed and curated for appearances, but in the honest sense. By the specific people whose lives intersect with his most directly. By the children, the colleagues, the friends, the community that will actually feel his absence when he is gone. What kind of presence has he been in those lives? And what kind of presence does he want to be in whatever years remain? This question, taken seriously, tends to reorganize a person's priorities in ways that the earlier questions rarely do, because it asks, directly and without evasion, what matters most. And the answer, for most people who sit with it honestly, is surprisingly consistent. Not the accomplishments, not the accumulations, not the positions held. The relationships, the quality of the person they were in the daily encounter with the people closest to them. That answer, arrived at honestly, is a powerful guide to how the second half ought to be lived. What the second half actually requires. The second half of life is not automatically rich simply because a person has reached it. Time alone does not produce wisdom. Experience alone does not produce good judgment. The years between 40 and 60 are an opportunity, not a guarantee. What makes them productive? What separates the man who enters the second half and grows from the man who enters it and simply ages is a set of deliberate choices, choices made with more honesty and more intention than the first half typically allowed. The first choice is the willingness to examine. Most people ask themselves the big questions in passing. What is my life for? What matters now? And then Monday arrives and the question is set aside and the day proceeds as usual. The second half gives a person the opportunity to give those questions their due. The examined life, the one Socrates declared to be the only life worth living, is not a luxury. It is the only reliable way to ensure that the years ahead are directed towards something genuinely worth having. The second choice is the willingness to change. This is the one that is easiest to name and hardest to practice. By the time a person is 50, they have a great deal of established momentum, habits formed over decades, professional patterns deeply grooved, ways of relating to people that have become so automatic they are barely visible, beliefs about themselves, both their capacities and their limitations, that have been confirmed so many times by experience that they feel like facts rather than interpretations. Changing any of these things requires the recognition that they are, in fact, choices, that the way things have been is not necessarily the way they must continue to be, that the person one has been for the past 25 years is not the only person available to be. This recognition is not available to everyone. Some people arrive at 50 with the firm conviction that they are essentially finished in the sense of formed, that who they are is set, and that the best available use of the remaining years is to continue as they have been, only more comfortably. I think this is one of the saddest available conclusions, because the evidence suggests quite clearly that significant change is possible at any age, for any person who genuinely wants it and is willing to work for it. The 70-year-old who learns a new language, the 60-year-old who builds a new enterprise, the 55-year-old who, for the first time in his adult life, begins to genuinely listen to the people closest to him rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. These are not exceptional cases. They are examples of what becomes possible when a person declines to accept that they are finished. The third choice is perhaps the most important and the least often discussed. It is the choice to give. The first half of life is, by necessity, largely acquisitive. We are building, accumulating the knowledge, the resources, the relationships, the experience that adult life requires. This is not selfishness, it is the appropriate work of that season. But a person who continues to operate primarily in acquisitive mode into their 50s and 60s is missing something essential about what the second half is for. The deepest satisfaction available in the second half of a life, the kind that the first half, for all its accomplishments, rarely produces, comes from giving, from the deliberate, sustained contribution of what one has become to the people and purposes that need it. The mentor who gives his time and hard-won judgment to a younger person who is where he was 30 years ago. The father who finally puts down the professional burdens and gives his children the presents they have always needed from him. The man who turns his accumulated knowledge toward the community that shaped him, or toward the cause that his years of living have convinced him matters most. The examples that make this real. Winston Churchill was 66 years old when he became Prime Minister of Great Britain for the first time in the spring of 1940. He had spent the preceding decade largely out of political power, often dismissed by his colleagues as an irrelevant figure from a previous era. He had made mistakes in his career, serious ones, and his reputation had suffered for them. What those years of apparent failure had not diminished was his understanding of what was at stake in the world, his clarity about what needed to be said and done, and his capacity to communicate both with a precision that no younger man in British public life could match. He had spent 66 years becoming the instrument that the moment required, and when the moment arrived, the instrument was ready. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote the first of her Little House books at the age of 65. She had lived the experiences those books described decades earlier as a child on the American frontier. But the capacity to translate that experience into literature that would reach millions of readers, that capacity required years of living and writing and observing that she did not yet possess at 20 or 30. The books she produced in the last chapter of her life are not important because she wrote them late. They are important because they could only have been written by someone with 65 years of living behind them. The life preceded the work. The work required the life. And Charles Darwin. Darwin published On the Origin of Species at the age of 50. He had been thinking about the ideas it contained for more than 20 years, observing, collecting evidence, examining his conclusions with a care that was almost excessive. He knew the ideas were important. He also knew they were not ready until they were ready, and that readiness was measured not in years, but in the depth of the understanding he had achieved. The great work of his life required the full 50 years of the preparation that preceded it. I do not tell these stories to suggest that every person in the second half of their life is going to produce a historic contribution. Most will not, and there is no shame in that. Most lives are not famous. Most contributions are not recorded anywhere except in the memories of the specific people whose lives were touched. But those contributions, quiet, personal, unmeasured by any public standard, can be just as real, just as significant to the people who receive them. The grandfather who finally has the patience he never had when his children were young and gives it to his grandchildren without reservation, he is making a contribution. The man who spent 30 years in a profession and now teaches what he knows to the next generation, not for recognition, but because the knowledge deserves to be passed on, he is making a contribution. The woman who spent the first half of her life meeting everyone else's needs and now turns her attention, finally, to the work that has always mattered most to her, she is making a contribution. The second half is not smaller than the first. In most cases, if it is understood and entered deliberately, it is larger, because it is built on something the first half could not have provided, the full weight of everything that came before it. So, the years that lie ahead of you are not a diminished version of the years behind. They are a different country, with a different climate, different landmarks, different possibilities. Richer in some ways, more demanding in others, but genuinely rich if you are willing to enter them with the honesty and intention they deserve. The questions it will ask of you: what do you believe? What are you for? What kind of person do you want to be in the lives of the people closest to you? Are not easy questions. They were not designed to be. They are the questions that come only after sufficient living to make the answers meaningful. Most people avoid them. They prefer the familiar momentum of the first half, the known patterns, the established habits, the comfortable assurance that the next year will look more or less like the last one. But the man or woman who chooses to engage with those questions, who sits with them honestly, who follows their answers wherever they lead, who makes the adjustments that honesty requires, that person enters the second half of their life with something genuinely valuable. Not youth, not the particular energy of a person who has everything still ahead of them and nothing yet behind. Something better than that. The clarity of a person who knows what matters, the judgment of a person who has been paying attention, the freedom of a person who has nothing left to prove, and the time, God willing, a good deal of it, to put all of that to work in the service of what matters most. The best years of your life may still be ahead, not in spite of everything you have already been through, because of it.